Hello there YouTube, Bruised here. Welcome to my hamster wheel of thoughts, where today we're going to be talking about my thoughts on the 0.2.0 patch for Path of Exile 2, and some other general discussions that I personally would love to have with GGG, or that I'd love to see other creators bring up in conversation. Now, some of these things have been talked about before, but I still kind of want to put my own thoughts on these topics anyway, if it seems like we haven't heard much about them in a while. The gameplay that you're watching right now is just some random gameplay of my Lightning Amazon running through some maps while I talk. Feel free, push me off to the side if you just want to hear my voice, or check it out if you want to take a look there. Patch 0.2.0 officially dropped on April 4th. As of this recording, it is April 12th. Now, I didn't get to play very much on the opening weekend due to just generally being busy, but we'll say that it got off to a rocky start, because boy did it. From what I initially did play, the monsters were overly tanky, early game spear skills, all wanted to do their full effect based off of either parrying a monster or generating a frenzy charge and then using the skill again, of which there are very few ways to get frenzy charges, especially in the early game. The community overall was collectively losing their minds at this patch. Now, by the time I was really able to sink my teeth into the patch, GGG had already made some major changes to monster life and made a few other adjustments, such as adding a spear skill that culls an enemy and grants a frenzy charge on doing so. And once I got my hands on Lightning Spear and Primal Strike, it was actually a pretty smooth sailing experience through the rest of the campaign. The Huntress and Spear skills are pretty fun, have some decent variety to them between like Bleed and Elemental stuff. The endgame Corruption Cleansing, the Spirits, Fracturing Orbs, Recombination is all pretty fun, and adds a bit more to the mapping experience and kind of juices the endgame a little bit more. The majority of this patch overall, however, is what I would consider to be a catch-up kind of patch, right? Now, they toned down player power, in some ways good, in some ways bad. They added a good bit of new content between the new class, new weapon type, the various crafting improvements and the additions, new mechanic in the wisps, various endgame stuff like with the corruption and the cleansing and all that kind of stuff, and some other general balance changes, especially in the form of, you know, the endgame bosses getting changed, difficulty being changed, monsters being changed. But honestly, playing a character through the maps again for me left me kind of roughly feeling the same way as I did at the end of patch 0.1.0, where I had fun with what I did play, characters cruising pretty decently, I'm mapping pretty nicely, but I'm already kind of just waiting for new content to be added. Now, unlike a lot of people in the community, from what I've been hearing, I do not think that this has been a bad patch. Now, do I think that GGG was flawless with the execution of this patch? No. But do I think that there was also a severe overreaction from the community? Yes. Now, this ultimately has been a lot of good that did come out of this, even if it did come at the cost of the community collectively losing their mind. But we did all collectively also say, hey, this doesn't feel great currently. And even as I speak, GGG has put out another list of items that they're planning to update, including allowing players to respec their Ascendancy class, which is all very good things, but I really don't like the way that the community essentially blew up at GGG to make these changes. Now, regardless of that, this patch overall did feel like it lit a fire under GGG's ass to really make sure that the game feels good to play on the player power side, and that things feel good just in general, that monsters are more balanced, that there is some more good getting pushed into the game rather than just trying to take and slow things down. And I'm hopeful that they'll be able to learn and keep the momentum from this patch moving forward into their next big updates. Now, what I will say from a community side, however, is that I really hate seeing so many players who do not know how to balance or design or even provide actual constructive feedback, where all that we get is typing W or L in a chat. It is annoying, it is frustrating to watch happen, and it does not provide any actual direction or insight as to why a player might be frustrated or unhappy. It's just a bunch of people just saying that, or game bad, or fix loot. None of this is constructive, none of this helps. You are not saying why you are feeling this way, you are just saying unuseful garbage to the devs, and they are actively listening and making changes to the game based on what they hear from us players. But if we're being a bunch of assholes to them, that isn't going to be anything constructive from either side. They're going to be less willing to listen to us and actually fix the things that do feel bad versus like what they do now, where they're actually, when we do provide genuine feedback and when we're actually patient to let them fix the things, investigate, fix things, make some changes, then there is a lot of good that comes into it. Again, this patch started extremely rough. It did. Like, there was a lot of things that they kind of did wrong, and that they did admit as well. They said, hey, we fucked up here, and we want to fix this. We fucked up here, this is how we're going to change it. And that is great. But it's something that I really want players to continue to be more constructive with, rather than just blowing up at them and just saying, fix it, or I'm literally leaving. Like, that doesn't help anybody here. So, as I've said, I still am very much looking forward to future patches in this game. The game is still a ton of fun. There's still so much to explore and figure out. I love me an unsolved game, which this game is still very much so unsolved. There's still so much stuff to explore and find out and do, and I genuinely really enjoy it. Now, like I said, this patch has had a tough start, but I think it will wind up being an incredibly important patch for everybody involved, and that we will continue to get more fun and good patches as things kind of come down the line. And I think one of the biggest deals with that as well is that I'm really hopeful that the power and the kind of things that GGG learned from this will be enough to where they can say, okay, players are in a good state right now with all the changes that we've made. So when we add new things to the game, we know that to keep things roughly around this kind of power, roughly around this kind of speed, and that we can kind of move forward with that kind of deal. Now, with that said, though, those are kind of all my thoughts that I had on 020. Like I said, a lot of fun. But I want to move into some other general discussions. So with that being said, I want to move into some series of topics that I would love to hear GGG comment on. Even something as simple as, yep, we're looking into this would be awesome in my eyes. There are a few things that they have commented on, but I want to talk about them regardless, just for the sake of it. And I know I'm basically just shouting into the void here, but I want to put my thoughts and questions out on some of these topics. This will probably be a bit more negatively focused. Again, I love the game. I think it's a lot of fun, but there are still some things that obviously need to be changed and addressed. And these are also issues that I personally still struggle with in the game. Some less than others, but still important enough for me to want to discuss. So kicking it off, Trial of Chaos is easily still one of the most frustrating areas in the entire game. Now, I do understand that a good amount of player power is tied there with it being our current other means of ascension, the other one being Trial of Sekhema, but it's just so wildly out of tune versus Trial of Sekhema, in my opinion. There are some builds that do excel at Trial of Chaos, but no matter how many times I've run this trial, I still can't help but be annoyed. And my annoyance falls under a couple of categories, so let's break it down. One, it feels entirely RNG related as to if I will even be able to complete a full round of Trial of Chaos. You get a bad set of modifiers at the start, too bad, you're probably dead, do it again. Number two, there doesn't feel like there's any source of outplaying the mechanics, so to speak, like you can in Sekhema, which also kind of largely ties to the RNG of the modifiers that you receive. Number three, the mini games, so to speak, the wave games that you have to play, feel so much worse and more punishing. You don't take the timer off for killing rares during the survive. Carrying the crystals around, they deal constant damage to you. They summon monsters on you. You're not safe when you're putting the crystal away. The Sky Seer boss at the end still kicks my ass, even after it's been getting nerfed a handful of times, though this one's probably a skill issue. And number four, though, there's no guaranteed time that you'll get to fight the Trial Master. In Sekhema's, all you have to do is you find a coin that has 4 trials on it for you to complete. Trial of Chaos, however, you need to complete a 10 wave and get a fragment that drops from the final boss to then put in the back of the wall. However, there's no guarantee that you'll drop a fragment that you're missing, which ultimately means that if you're playing SSF or you don't have currency to trade into the fragment that you're missing, you might have to run Trial of Chaos more than 4 rounds for a fight with Trial Master for your final ascendancy points. It just depends on how unlucky or lucky you are. It just feels like more unnecessarily punishing system unless you have a specific build for it. As such, I have a couple of potential ideas that would maybe help Trial feel better, at least early on. Now, tiered modifiers are a potential start, which the idea here is that the modifiers would start lower. So you have, like when you have the 4-wave one that you do, the first quest one that you do, that would either have less of the punishing and difficult modifiers, or it would alter the values on existing modifiers to kind of match the early game power that players have more. They can get stronger as you get to ones that you find that have, 7 waves for you to complete, and then they could probably go back to their current power again once we get to 10 waves. Now this would help Trial of Chaos feel more like you're kind of ramping into the difficulty alongside your character being stronger at the same time to match the power it's being put against. Some other ideas are simply that the mini games in each wave should maybe be tweaked in better waves. If you kill rares in the survive combat one, you take time off the clock. That would match what happens in the Sekhema trial when you get those the hourglass trials there. And the crystal carrying should honestly either both not deal damage to you while you're carrying the crystal, and it should grant you invulnerability when you're putting it into the actual stone, just so that you don't have an instance where you're trying to put the stone down, but then suddenly you're swarmed by the monsters that it spawns, or if you have like the ruin ghost as well and it comes up and slaps you while you're putting the rock in, then you're not gaining stacks of ruin or anything like that. But last, I would also love a system that reads what fragments are already in the door when you start a round of Trial of Chaos, so that you're guaranteed to have fewer runs needed to fight the Trial Master. It's already way harder in my opinion, but this only buffs SSF players, as trade players can already just buy every fragment they want to, if they really want to just go in, run it once, go up and fight the Trial Master. Now I have far fewer notes on the Trial of Sekhimas. When I first started playing, I wasn't a fan of this trial, but I'm more okay with it nowadays. Maybe it's just because I dislike Trial of Chaos that much. I'm really not a huge Sanctum enjoyer from Path of Exile 1, but there are still a few areas of improvement that can be made here in my eyes for sure. One big thing is exit rooms should be safe upon completion of the room that you're in. No monster should be able to enter those rooms at the end of the trial to me, because the amount of times where I've completed the trial and then I'm going over to the map to look, and then a monster strolls in after me when maybe I didn't even notice that it was alive. A monster strolls in after me while I'm looking at the map, and then either starts attacking me and I lose some of my honor, or I just am like, oh my god, there's a monster there, and I turn around and have to kill it, because that to me just shouldn't happen. Like, there just should not be monsters that are allowed to come in after you and attack you still. I also believe that there are certain rare mods that either shouldn't be appearing in there, or that they should be far less common. And the biggest offender I can think of is Proximal Tangibility. The mod is frustrating enough as it is, but pairing that in where you have to dodge traps and you're trying your best to not get hit in general, my eyes roll so far into the back of my head when I see those monsters in Trial. Rare mods should be looked at for this trial. Haste Aura is another fairly problematic one in my opinion, as it can suddenly change the flow of everything you're fighting while you're still stressing about not getting hit, especially if you're in like the big trap rooms, or even if you're in an hourglass room where all of a sudden a rare shows up, has haste, and everything is just coming after you faster. That is all I have with Trial of Sekhema. Like I said, it was far fewer notes, and so I'm kind of pivoting over strangely into kind of some more itemization and skill gem changes now. So what I have up next is flat spell damage. It is a general conversation I would kind of like to just hear GG's thoughts on overall. So currently there are no sources of flat spell damage in the game, not that I can think of or that I've found, which also applies to mana regen too. Mana regen and spell damage are both flat stats that have no direct numerical increases. There are a number of spells in the game that feel like they would benefit very heavily from some kind of added flat spell damage, and ultimately these stats missing from the game kind of makes spell weapons feel a bit more one note on what you're looking for stat wise. Like, every spell weapon is literally plus spell levels, increased spell damage, whatever flavor of damage you're focused on, cast speed, and damages extra damage. This is mostly just a design question I'd be very interested to hear the devs speak on. It's entirely possible that these stats show up in a future patch, but in my opinion right now, currently building around spells feels pretty one note when it comes to like an itemization perspective. Like, it just feels like there's something that's missing there. And speaking of skills, let's talk about flat added attack or cast speed, skill gem levels, and mana cost, speaking of mana regen, that are all next on my list here. So one of the few things in the game that I am very actively against thus far has been the use of adding plus X seconds to the attack or cast time of some skills. GGG has always said that they like to provide us with a problem to fix when it comes to using skills or items. However, the addition of putting added time on top of certain skills seriously undermines our ability as players to engage and solve these skills to make them fit around our builds. No matter how fast we cast or attack, there will always be at least a full second to the animation speed of some of these attacks. And in my eyes, if the primary way of engaging with something is to make something else use it, like totems for Sunder, or cast on Shock, Freeze, Ignite for, you know, especially the big Ice Meteor spell, I'm forgetting the name of it, then it's not a very fun way to fix the problem of these skills. And I'd love to make a build around some of these skills and heavily kind of focus on becoming fast enough to feel good spamming them. But it's currently just impossible. The design decision of these skills has just been a mystery to me. I'd really like to hear why they went this route. Maybe there's just something I'm missing. Maybe they're fine with it, but I don't like the idea that no matter what you do, there is always going to be a flat 1 second to something. And maybe it's because they really want you to try to focus on comboing these skills, but I would rather just try to fix it in a more exciting way and use that as like a main skill, and maybe try to use something else as a support for this skill. Skill gem levels is something I really want some adjustment on as well. In Path of Exile 1, the highest skill gems are level 34, level 38 for Arcane Sprint, but 34, which gives you a very early idea to try any skill in the game and decide on if you want to continue using it or if you want to swap to a different skill. Path 2, however, you have to wait until level 52 to try out the highest tier of skills. Now, I understand these abilities are usually supposed to be strong and kind of big finishing abilities, but waiting until you're most of the way through the campaign to find out if you even like the feel of a gem seems pretty ridiculous to me. There have been a handful of characters I've made with an idea for a build or a gem in mind, but I have to wait until nearly cruel mode to try them out, or even most of the way through cruel mode, and if I don't like the feel, well, that's a lot of work to fix and build something else out instead. And if we got these toned down a few levels to not be nearly endgame levels, that would be so much more ideal. Because honestly as well, you know, how much, if there's like say a new player as well, new player goes in, they try out this skill gem, they're like, oh, I want to try this skill gem, that seems cool, but I have to wait until, you know, level 50 to try this out. They finally get to level 50, they grind it out, they try it, and they're like, well, I don't like this. Well, then it's so much work to try to respec for them as well. It's even more for a new player than it is for a player that has already been playing for a long time, but it's still annoying regardless. And mana costs, I know, this is a topic, it's already happened, as they just did do some mana adjustment costs this patch, but regardless, mana costs are still absolutely insane for most builds. My Lightning Spear costs roughly 65 mana every time I throw it. I have 460 mana, so I can only throw this thing like 7-ish times before I'm drained. I have to chug a flask away from my mana to recharge. And of course, I also attack incredibly fast, so if I'm sitting there and just able to just continuously chuck at a big target, my mana is going down incredibly quickly. Now, of course, do I know that the support inspiration exists and that helps mana cost for one skill? Yes, but ultimately, that doesn't have any additional bonus outside of this just reduces your mana cost too. Now, last patch I tried out an Eye of Winter build, but I could only cast the thing 2 or 3 times before I was totally out of mana, and that was with a bunch of Arcane Surge and other mana regen effects and inspiration in that gem. It was insane. I can't say for sure what should be done here, but mana costs still feel really down in the dumps for any kind of fast attacking or casting build. There are also so few ways in the game to leech mana unless you're doing a Fizz build, or you have to be one of the 3 people that are playing Acolyte of Chayula. Now, speaking of Acolyte of Chayula, let's talk about some underpowered ascendancies. Now, I do know that GGG is aware of usage stats on each ascendancy, and that they have been looking into making them feel better. However, I still want to talk about some of these ascendancies, just from my own perspective on why I'm currently not a fan of their design. So first, Acolyte. Now, GGG buffed Acolyte this patch to make their Mana Leech node Mana Leech recovers based on other damage type, other damage types damage as well as physical damage, which overall, this is a good change. It allows Mana Leech node to apply to Energy Shield down the tree, seemingly better. I haven't actually tested to see if this feels good overall. I hope it does. But the rest of Acolyte remains pretty much the same, and that just isn't a good thing. The only other change that was received allowed players to gain 8 darkness per level instead of 5. And if you're unaware of what darkness even does, because why would you? A quick description is that it completely removes your spirit, gives you a flat 100 darkness, and you gain 8 per level now. And whenever you take damage, your darkness gets reserved for a few seconds instead of you taking the damage. You can further invest to gain damage as extra chaos damage per 20 unreserved, or make the reservation a little bit less taxing on you when you take a hit. Now this sounds interesting. However, this ultimately means that you have no access to any aura skills, and if you take any damage at all, you're directly losing damage or losing what you ascended into. Most monsters late game do enough damage to pretty much 1 or 2 shot the entirety of your darkness bar, and this is why I largely feel like Acolyte feels so one-note and weak. The darkness mechanic just needs more time to cook. I think if it either let you still use auras, and when you take damage, it still reserves over the cost of the aura, thus disabling it until you don't take damage, or becoming a skill that allowed you to apply the small spirit buffs to, such as precision, vitality, clarity, etc., and reserved still just like a little bit of darkness and then still did the previous thing or something else, that would be a huge quality for this ascension. Darkness just overall needs to be stronger and feel more worth investing in, because currently using darkness to turn off your spirit, it just is not strong enough to warrant removing such a powerful piece of player power from any kind of build. So while on the topic being one note though, let's swap to Blood Mage. This remains to be one of the weirdest design ascendancies in the entire game to me, and I honestly want to know if the reason the ascendancy stays this way is just due to wanting the aesthetic of the actual ascendancy tree to stay in the shape of a heart, because this ascendancy is the only one in the game currently that does not give you a choice or a different direction you can go on your first ascendancy. There's no other direction you can pick, no decisions to make if you take Blood Mage. You have to take Sanguimancy on your first lab. Now, when I ran this ascendancy, I literally just took the one node before Sanguimancy, which just gives you more maximum life, instead of taking that, because it's actively detrimental to an early level character to take that node, since it just gives your skills a life cost equal to the mana cost. Life Remnants is the other half of the skill, which grants you a chance to generate a life orb on killing a monster, or guaranteed 1 on a crit. In my own playthrough, it just felt bad. There was literally no reason to use that node, so I effectively didn't feel like I had a real ascendancy or character until my second lab, and even then I felt like I needed to take Vitality Siphon, which grants 10% of spell damage to Leech's life. Now once I had that, it started to feel at least more manageable. But to me, having to wait until second lab to feel decent as a character, and ultimately still not technically feeling more powerful by that point, it just didn't seem like a worthwhile investment. Now, I know that there are, of course, builds and people that utilize Blood Mage and get around these kinds of things, but it's so much effort to build around this, and really starts to feel like you don't actually get seriously anything from a player power perspective until third lab at the earliest. This ascendancy has some really strong nodes and some cool things that are possible, but with your first lab being a set destination, and second lab also feeling like there was already a very clear direction that you almost have to go, I just couldn't get into the ascendancy. I think the fix here is to give players more initial options, or at least give Sanguimancy a benefit outside of just making your skills cost life as well, essentially. Now, I could reasonably go into some other ascendancies, especially Warriors. Titan didn't really jazz me up to do mace skills, and Smith of Katava had some really weak power to them to start. But I think GGG already knows that mace skills, the Warrior side of the tree, you know, mace skills, mace tree, and things on Warrior just generally kind of need to improve, so I won't really beat a dead horse here. I'm just hopeful that they will continue to improve and give me a desire to really try out some of the mace skills in the future and kind of really invest in that area of the tree. So with that, I kind of want to move over into damage conversion. This is actually something I'm most unsure of how to classify this. Like, it's not really an issue, and it's probably not something super far up on GGG's radar. It's just kind of something I'd like to see more of, personally. Now, I will initially say, there are some really fun damage conversion options in the game. There's Blue Flame, which converts your fire to cold. There's Valakos Vice, which converts your fire to lightning damage. And there's Painter's Servant, to list a couple, which Painter's Servant converts 100% of your physical damage to each of the other elements. But actual full conversion on skills is less so there. And outside of using a unique, there really aren't many ways to convert damage on their own. Some of my absolute favorite builds in Path of Exile run revolve around converting one damage type into a different type and building it in kind of a different way like that, or around another way. And I was initially super excited for damage conversion in this game, since GGG told us that once you have converted damage types, you don't need to dual scale Fizz, or whatever the element initially was, and that element anymore. You just scale what you converted to. But as it stands right now, there are so few ways to convert damage, and skills don't largely convert all of their physical damage, outside of a few instances or maybe some bonus effects on the skill, that you still end up having to build both Fizz and the element of the skill that we're using. And maybe this is something in the future that becomes a bit easier to convert, or they'll add more options for doing so, will allow for my favorite kind of build to really thrive again. Again, this isn't really a huge issue to me. I just think damage conversion is a really fun mechanic to play around with, and I always want to hear more about additional sources of it. Alright, here we go. Player weight. Whoo boy, why are we not more caked up, brother? Player weight is so absolutely weird and jarring to me. This is something also that comes up from time to time, and they did make a change a while ago to make it so that we don't get pushed around by literally every enemy and can actually shove the smaller enemies around a bit. But I have to ask, why do we still feel like we're such paperweights? I think it's largely due to what feels like nearly every enemy in the game having some kind of leap or a push or a knockback tied to them. They just feel like I'm stuck in a game of pinball at times, depending on the enemy variety in a given map. And the other part of this is, why can't I roll through pots and baskets to break shit? Oh, it drives me crazy. Those little items are largely the most annoying things on any given map. I can't tell you how many times I've backed up and been killed due to being caught on a set of pottery in a zone that I could not roll over. It drives me crazy every time. And also, like, come on, man. Let me smash the pots when I roll through them. That would be so much more satisfying. Because also, clicking on all of them tends to be a hassle and tedious, and I almost never bother. You know, I could be missing out on some serious bonus gold or some other random stuff that's hiding in them. So honestly, I just want some kind of way to make characters feel a little bit more sturdy. You know, let us roll through the pots. Maybe make not every enemy have some kind of knockback effect. You know, maybe when we're being pushed in a channeling skill as well, the camera actually stays locked to where your character is actually going to be moving to. Because currently, when you channel a skill and you get shoved, the camera stays to where your character was, and then it snaps over to you at the end of the animation, which is just very jarring. So I don't know. I just really want some more quality of life to be done here. It'd be nice to see a few more things get added, just to make characters feel less like we are very light, that we're very much so just paper. You know, how can I be the thickest warrior around but still get shoved around by just a basic skeleton or something that has some kind of knockback? You know, it's very just strange to me. But while we're on the topic of being pushed, let's talk about the distance an enemy goes when they are heavy stunned. If you've watched any of the mapping I've been doing during this video, you've probably seen it. An enemy will get stunned in the middle of me doing like Primal Strike or anything, and they get knocked so far away that I miss the final and strongest hit of my combo. And it is so frustrating that nearly every enemy gets knocked that far away, especially while mid-combo. And I had this issue last patch as well with my grenade character, where an enemy would be stunned and pushed so far away that my grenades would completely whiff because of the distance they suddenly just moved back. And it seems pretty reasonable that they just should be adjusted so that enemies don't fall out of a player's combos. It's majority of the time it feels like I'm getting punished for heavy stunning an enemy while I'm the one that just did it. But every enemy can, you know, just like stun me and gets a total benefit for it. But if I stun them, they're like knocked back into Path of Exile 3 is how far back they go. So yeah, I would love to just see some general improvements there. Now, on a similar note of small quality of life things I think it should just be in the game is at least an option to turn on and off name locking. So name locking happens, I would say, mostly with crossbow abilities, or any abilities that kind of have a channel or a multi-strike combo, like Tempest Flurry with quarter staves as well. What it does is when you start the ability and have aimed at a target, the game will not allow you to change targets off of what it initially locked onto until the ability is done, or if you stop firing or stop using it. So if you start firing a crossbow clip at a target, but want to move your mouse over to a smaller target or something mid-clip, the game will not aim there until you stop firing where the clip is empty. And this happens a lot with Tempest Flurry or other channeled abilities as well. I can think of many instances where I'd put down the bell in front of a big target and then try to Tempest Flurry onto it, but the game would name lock me onto the enemy next to the bell, and instead I would just completely whiff the bell and never hit it. It feels pretty ridiculous. It feels like I'm using controller even when I'm using keyboard and mouse. Like, I think the game is actually kind of treating keyboard and mouse still like a controller. This is just a setting I would love to have an option to disable, so I can choose where my shots are going. You know, I can understand certain instances, or if you are on controller, where this could be useful, or for beginning players, you know, this could probably be pretty useful. But it becomes increasingly frustrating to use these kinds of abilities later in the game, because the game is kind of actively choosing the target for you instead of being able to really try to swivel in and out. My last target of discussion I have for today is rare mods, and more specifically, Proximal Tangibility, Periodically Enrages, and Respawns minions. Now, these mods to me are my own personal hell. Like, I hate all of them. Periodically Enrages less so, but my annoyance from this is the mod use of the word periodically. Like, let's talk about that first, in fact. What does periodically mean? Why is it that when a monster enrages, it's not a periodic in and out type of deal, but that it just becomes enraged for the rest of its life? That's how this modifier works in Path of Exile 1, and I can't tell if it's bugged or mislabeled or something, but it should be dropping in and out of enrage. I have genuinely watched a monster follow me for fully enraged for like half a map as I was trying to see when it was going to lose the enraged status, and it just never did. That just tells me that this should either just be named differently, or that it's bugged and I'm just seeing the full-time anger of these monsters. Now, my next hell would absolutely be Respawns minions, because this effect just happens so quickly, and sometimes on really terrible monsters, that I literally just give up and leave the area where they are sometimes. I'm pretty sure that these monster corpses also can't be destroyed. I've tried shattering them on builds that should be shattering literally everything, and they just fall over, only to be revived again instantly. I don't mind that this modifier brings its smaller minions back. It's simply the speed at which it happens. There should be longer than like a 1 second delay, or however long it is, for these things to respawn and start smacking me again. Because sometimes as well, the rare is incredibly tanky, or it's kind of hiding somewhere far away, or like around the corner from these minions, and so I don't even know where the rare is, and I'm just trying to track them down in this middle of this full pack of monsters that's trying to eat my ass. It can be incredibly tiring. Would love some kind of adjustment, pretty much just on the respawn timer, or at least something in their monster modifier with the minions that just says like they revive after being killed or something, because definitely times I'll be looking at the minions and I won't even notice that they revive for a while because I'm fighting maybe another pack of monsters, so I just keep being like, why isn't this pack going down? And then I have to realize, oh, they're reviving. Okay, so I have to go find the rare, and then I'll kind of track them down. But with that, though, we finally have to come into my worst hell, which is Proximal Tangibility. I just hate this modifier. It's just terrible to run into, no matter where I am and what build I'm doing. There's like almost no indicator as to how close the proximity is for me to damage them. If the monster gets heavy stunned, then hey, guess what? It gets stunned back into its immortality range, so I have to follow up on it again to do anything. Not only that, but you can sometimes find very annoying packs of like blue monsters with the modifier. It's also not always clear if it's a Proximal Intangibility or a Shroud Walker, because they kind of can have the same effect looking on them sometimes. So I don't even immediately realize what I'm dealing with occasionally. I would say the worst, though, has got to be when this shows up on rares. The combination of modifiers you can get hit with on top of Proximal is just the worst. Even more damning if you run into one while you're in Trial Sekhimas or somewhere else really important. Personally, I'd love to see this modifier nuked from orbit. It likely won't be, and I'm definitely just bitching about it, because it's something that's just very obnoxious to me specifically. But that's just kind of the way that it goes. I don't really know what else you would do to this modifier to make it less annoying. Maybe if there was really just like a, hey, this is the range, if there was some kind of range indicator as to like how close you had to be, that would be a little bit better, because right now I am absolutely just running up and like making out with each of these monsters individually to actually damage them, and it can be extremely annoying. Oh, that's right, one more. This was just funny to me, but here's a clip I took of the Lightning Mirage when hit modifier. So I don't recall this modifier being something that will track you permanently. I previously thought they just went like a set distance and then they would just explode anyway. But I had these two Mirages following me around for roughly like half a map, and sometimes they would even lose aggro and just stand around until I got close enough again for them to follow me again. So I'm not sure if that's bugged or intentional, but it was just like kind of funny to me. So here's just the clip of them walking around with me.
I'll take that. The odds are done.
With that, though, let's move into some closing thoughts. Like I've said, this game is still super early on. We are in 0.2.0, and I think it's really tough to realize that at times. We still have to go through, I mean, unless they're going to skip some versions and everything, we still have to go through 0.8 more patches of like major patches to the game before we get to the 1.0 dream. And again, it's hard to realize that. The game is still a ton of fun, and it's already an insanely big game that you can sink huge amount of hours in, and you can still have things to do. I have almost 400 hours in the game, most of which came from last patch, but I have roughly 400 hours in the game, and I still just have a lot of fun logging in and trying to go do something weird. GGG is doing a really good job of making a game and responding well when the community has ideas that go against what they think. They're always willing to take a different kind of viewpoint and a different kind of stance, way more so than they ever were before. And I genuinely hope that they are proud of all of the work that they've done so far. I'm looking forward to playing a lot more in the future and throwing together more weird-ass builds to make videos on. Now, to the community, GGG is extremely transparent with us currently. And the thing that scares me the most is the community pushing them to a point where they no longer want to communicate with us outside of right before a patch. There's still a lot of work of improvements to be made, but let's be constructive with our feedback. And with that, I hope everybody has a great time with Path of Exile 2, especially in this patch with good old Dawn of the Hunt. I hope it's a good time. I hope they continue to put out good patches and make various improvements to the rest of the game. Drop your thoughts and feelings in the comments as well if you'd like. I'd love to hear other perspectives on pretty much all of this or just whatever else, you know, maybe is something that you have that you would like to talk about as well. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, stay sane, Exiles.